Let's get joined up. Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joinedup. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. So thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a regular show about all things writing, including interviews with authors, screenwriters and key figures from the publishing industry. Plus loads of hints, tips and inspiration for all creatives. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review or just tell a friend.
Joined Up Writing.
Yes, hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 141 with award-winning author Cath Barton, who talks about her new novella, In the Sweep of the Bay, and why it's never too late to start writing and to continue to learn the craft. Now, in last week's episode, you may remember I talked about the little book that I produced for my grand's small poetry collection, and that was going to take the book round to her so I could show it to her. Well, I did drop it off, and although unfortunately she didn't initially recognise either the words or to be honest even her own photograph, after some explanation from my auntie who helps to care for her, my gran was delighted with it, and I've been sent a nice picture of her reading it since. A bigger response really has been from the other members of my family, including those of whom were still unaware of her talent and were blown away when they got to read some of the poems. Everyone agrees it's a nice record and it's a legacy to keep for future generations, and I'm just really glad that I did it. It also inspired me to write a frivolous little pop song inspired by one of her pieces. And if I'm still feeling brave by the end of this podcast, I might even include my rough home-recorded demo of it for you to hear, or switch off, it's up to you, as appropriate. And songwriting, to be honest, is the only real writing I've done, again, all week. It's actually been one of my most productive periods from that point of view. I've written 3 songs and recorded the one I've just mentioned. In between that, I've opened the sequel to my novel, Safe Hands. I've reread some of it and then I've closed the project again. I've also tinkered with the outline for my TV pilot, despite the fact that what I really need to do is just get on with writing the first proper draft of the script. I don't know, in truth, my head's just been all over the place, and I know a large part of that is just a reaction of, to what's going on in the world right now, because like many of you, I'm anxious about the future, and sometimes it's difficult to summon the concentration and focus required to work on a novel or a script. So I've fallen back on songwriting because it's a lot easier to hold it together for a 3-minute song than it is for a page of prose or a multi-character script scene. It's just easier, I suppose, is what I'm saying. But you know what? I'm not going to beat myself up about it too much because I'm still trying to stay positive, and that's a lot easier to do when I'm doing something creative and producing something. And the few hours I spent recording my song a few nights ago was the most fun I've had in months. And the other stuff will come back soon, I'm sure of it. And so I'm just going to be kind to myself, and I suggest you do the same in these weird times that we're living through. But what about everyone else? How are your projects going? What sort of questions, themes and topics do you want me to cover in future episodes? Either way, I'd just love to know what you're up to. So let me know by tweeting me at JU Podcast, emailing Wayne at Wayne Kelly Writes, or dropping a line on the FB page. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free, and you can read a couple of my short stories, and there's a couple of other free guides, including one to NaNoWriMo, which obviously is on at the minute. Good luck to anyone who's doing that. And you'll be the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. I also wanted to say a quick thank you to those of you who got in touch after last week's episode, me kind of bearing my soul a little bit in the intro, and especially to previous guest Karen Heenan. I really appreciated the kind words, Karen, so thanks for that. Okay, let's get to today's interview with Cath Barton. So Cath lives in Abergavenny in Wales. She won the new Welsh Writing AmeriCymru Prize for the novella in 2017 for her book The Plankton Collector, which was published in September 2018 by New Welsh Review under the Rarebyte imprint. Her second novella, In the Sweep of the Bay, is out right now, published by the excellent Louise Walters Books, who's actually been on the show a few weeks ago. So here's our Skype chat recorded back in October, and I'll pop back at the end with my sign-off, and you can hear the song I mentioned too if you want to.
Joined up writing.
Morning, Cath. Thanks very much for taking the time to do Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it. So, why don't you tell us how things are going?
Hi, Wayne. It's great to talk to you. Well, I've got a new book coming out, which is my big book news. I've got a book coming out on the 23rd of November from Louise Walters Books, and it's my second novella, so that's exciting. Although difficult times in lockdown, no live launches.
Yeah, a bit strange, yeah.
So we'll be doing a Zoom launch, I expect.
Yeah, it's kind of adapting to this weird new world that we're currently in, isn't it?
Yeah. Strange world. I mean, like many writers, I've found it difficult to do new work. Mm-hmm. The first couple of months, I couldn't even read anything. Mm-hmm. Then that came back, and then I started writing a bit. But I wouldn't say my concentration's fabulous. Comes and goes. It's better in the summer, actually.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think a lot of people have said similar things. It's kind of difficult. I think it's okay once you kind of get into the zone, but it's getting into the zone is much more difficult these days with everything that's going on.
Yes, I was listening to Elizabeth Strout, who wrote the Olive Kitteridge books, talking at the Cheltenham Literary Festival the other day, and she was saying she could write, but whereas she used to write for 4 hours at a time, now she can only write for 2. So it's partly about getting into the zone, and it's partly just keeping the mind sort of quiet, I suppose.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Just do it in little short bursts, maybe, as opposed to trying to really lock into it. So whereabouts are you speaking from? I'm
in Abergavenny in South Wales.
Very nice.
Which is actually a lovely sunny morning here, and it's a lovely place to be. It's a small town.
Yeah.
With hills all around, which is a great blessing because I can get out and walk.
Yeah. Which
is really a lifesaver for me, getting out onto the hills.
Yeah, absolutely, especially with what's going on.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell her, you mentioned there at the top your new novella. So tell us about that. It's In the Sweep of the Bay, isn't it?
It is, and it's a story about a long marriage. It's set in Morecambe, and the story of Ted and Rene, and what happens to them from the 1950s until their deaths in the early 2000s. And there's another character, so it's mainly about their family, but there's also a story, a kind of counterpoint of an Italian younger person who comes. Their lives kind of intersect. It's a separate story, but it links.
I'd say, yeah. So it's kind of a story of relationships.
It's all about relationships.
Yeah. So what was the jumping off point for you? Do you remember when you kind of got the initial idea?
Yes, it was actually, and this is true of the first novella as well. They both started with a short piece. But I didn't intend to write a novella in either case. Mm-hmm. So I started from a short piece, which was really a snapshot of Ted and Rene in their old age, going out for the day and going to see the statue of Eric Morecambe and going to a cafe. And that's all it was, just a picture of their relationship. And from that, I wrote some other pieces, which I initially tried to turn into a novella in flash.
I see.
In other words, these separate pieces that could stand alone, but together would form a longer story. And that got nowhere. I entered that for the Bath novella in flash competition, got nowhere. So I didn't really think about what to do after that until I discovered, by chance, that Louise Walters was interested in novellas. Mm-hmm. So I, a bit cheekily actually, sent her what I'd written, because it only came to about 7,000 words.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh dear, she might just say, come on, don't waste my time. but she actually came back and said she really liked it, but it wasn't long enough, which I knew. Mm-hmm. And she couldn't at that time offer me, it wasn't enough for her to offer me a contract, but would I like to work on it, at my own risk.
Which is great, yeah, which is encouraging.
Which was really, really encouraging and really generous. And so I worked on it, sent her the longer story, and after a bit of backwards and forwards, she gave me a contract.
Fantastic. And so how did that feel?
That felt great, because it wasn't what I was meaning to do.
Yeah.
It wasn't what I intended to be my next project. So it sort of came in from the side, and then I worked on it with Louise and developed it, fleshed it out in different ways. And she did, she's very hands-on and very, very, very supportive and helpful, but you really have to work, which is good.
Yeah.
And then we got to the final, and there we are. So
excellent. So in that,
it was going to be.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say it was going to be published in September.
Yeah.
Just gone, but because of COVID, it got pushed back.
Yeah, I see. So during that kind of back and forth process, the kind of edit or whatever, what types of things did you kind of discuss? Where did, I'm not asking you to be obviously specific and spoil the story or anything like that, but in terms of the types of things that you tended to work on, and in terms of fleshing it out and building it up, what sorts of things were they? Do you remember?
Well, some of it was about saying a bit more about some of the characters. It wasn't so much, I'd got the story of the couple, Ted and Rene, but then there's the wider, their daughters, and also shifting things around sometimes to get the best order, and then the detail. The other thing that we were working at one at the same time on the structure and the detail, and just making sure I didn't keep repeating words. I'm terrible for that. Three lines, and the set's got the word together in each line, something like that. And I don't see it. So it was a process of the two things together.
Yeah. And so what was it about Ted and Rene, do you think, that you kind of fell in love with, or that you thought they could sustain this longer story? Because obviously it's something that you kept coming back to, first with The Flash and then obviously building it out into a longer story.
Yes, I think I'm very fascinated by the time of my childhood, which is the 1950s, and my previous book is set in that time, and it's also about a family. So Ted and Rene, to me, there's a sort of poignancy about their relationship, about the things that get between them, the things that keep them together, and I'm interested in that in terms of any relationship, really, and looking at the nuance of relationship, which in writing you sometimes have to suggest rather than being explicit about.
What sorts of things do you mean with that? So
I'll tell you about the scene that I started. I'm not sure if it's still up on Louise's website as an example. Anyway, they go to this cafe, and Ted says he fancies the fish. Not chips, just fish. And Rene says she thinks she'll have the liver. And they have this little bit of conversation about how he couldn't eat liver because it originated inside a person. And she said it's not a person, it's a pig. And there's a sort of reference, but when earlier in the book, she cooks liver and he doesn't mind. It's things that as a reader you think, hopefully as a reader you think, I remember that before. And it's just the little sort of talking about nothing, talking about everyday things that suggests something about the way they relate, and how in a long relationship you there are niggles, but when they finished and they go home on the bus, he lets her put her arm through his.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've got that bit of comfort. So there's that putting together the niggles and the really sustaining things about relationships that I hope come across. And that's what interests me in writing about their relationship over the years, from when they meet in a dance hall to when they get married, have their children. And then he is the chief of a ceramics factory. It's a family factory, and he has an assistant, and there's an issue. Well, he has an assistant and a younger woman. Should I just say that?
Yeah,
I'm not going to say
you've
anymore.
said enough. Yeah.
Don't want to say what happens or doesn't happen.
You've said enough. Yeah.
Enough, yeah.
And so in a lot of those things, it's kind of what's not said, isn't it? And it's like what's not done, like as in real life. You know, a lot of the times we speak in code, don't we? A lot of the times to each other, we've got ways of speaking to certain people, and we've got things that we say, and we've got things that we don't say, and it's kind of it's everything really.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what I really aim to do in my writing is leave those things out so that enable the reader to see them or to fill it in. And that's not always going to be in the same way. That's what really interests me, that different readers, people from very different backgrounds, can relate to the same writing. And that really encourages me when different people respond and say, people I know to come from very different backgrounds say they like my writing. Because it's what they put into it as well as what I've put.
Absolutely, you're planting that seed, aren't you? And how it grows in terms of in the reader's mind is going to be a different plant each time, if you like.
Yes. So, for instance, my first book, The Plankton Collector, was read by somebody in Indonesia, somebody I'd met, but he is a New Zealander who lives in Indonesia, has lived there for many years. And he said reading it made him think of his childhood. You know, she talks about childhood. And he could, brought things back to him, which obviously his childhood was very different from mine, which is what informed that book.
But as you say, there's probably universal truths in that with anybody's childhood and things that we experience and the way that we kind of grow up in the world.
Yes, and I think the challenge for the writer is to convey that universality without trying to be grandiose about it, but enable different people to get something from your work.
So let's just take a bit of a step back. So tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up in the first place, and kind of what your earliest memory of writing was. How did you come to writing?
Okay, so I grew up in Northampton in the English Midlands.
Not too far away from where I am now. I'm in Leicestershire, but not too far away.
Yeah, so I spent my whole childhood there, and in a pretty conventional lower middle class family. My dad worked in a bank. My mother stayed at home, as Rene does, in the sweep of the bay, and looked after me and my brother and cooked lunch for us and for Dad when he came home. And I went to school and I did the usual things. Writing wasn't a thing in my childhood. When I went to university, I went to Keele, I did English. The tutor we had, it was a wonderful man called Francis Doherty, said, you don't have to write essays, you can write creative work if you want. And I wrote a couple of short stories, and they were really bad. They were really, really embarrassingly bad. They were far too personal. But he was very encouraging, and he said to me, you've got to distance yourself from your experience when you write. And he really, I've never forgotten that. And when I got published, I wanted to let him know, and then I found he'd died, which was really sad. Anyway, I didn't write a lot then, or subsequently. And in my work life, I worked in the NHS, and I worked as a service planner. So I had to do a lot of writing. I had to write a lot of reports, but they were always factual things. And I knew that I could write. And in fact, I did an MSc about social policy, and I had to write a dissertation, and the comments on that were that my writing was very good. That was part of the comment. But I thought, I don't know, I can't write fiction. I don't know what to write about. So I'd never really seriously considered fiction from bits, not even bits and pieces. At one time I wrote poetry, sort of what I call diary poems. They didn't really amount to much. And I do really tiny things. I think when I lived in Bristol, the local paper used to publish very short stories. They'd give you the first sentence or the last sentence, and you'd have to write 150 words. And I do that a bit, but I never really thought seriously about creative writing until I had taken early retirement from my job, and my husband and I had moved to Abergavenny. And my husband, Oliver, went to a creative writing group. And I didn't think of doing that, wasn't really interested in doing that. He went to a group that was taught, and then the woman who was leading it had to stop, and the group decided they would meet on their own. Mm-hmm. And I'd been travelling a bit. I've been on various adventures, and I thought I'd like to do some travel writing. I said to Oliver, "Can I join the group and I'll do some travel writing?" Joined the group. Never did the travel writing, but I started doing other writing, and that was sort of the beginning of this passage of my writing. So it's about 10 years ago.
So there must have been something, even if it was subconscious, sort of driving you to write. You must have had some kind of desire to do it, even if you didn't sort of acknowledge it at the time.
Well, I did enjoy writing, the process of writing, even when I was doing work things. So, yes, there was some, perhaps, as you say, it was subconscious. And it went right back to that university experience, which was a very strong one. You know, I'd never forgotten it. But I just hadn't used it. I'd just been busy doing other stuff, I suppose. And then when work was no longer there, and I was making the life that you make after office work, mm-hmm. It became something that I wanted to do. And I thought I'd write some dialogue, because I didn't think I could do dialogue. And I wrote something, and I began to discover what was available online, all the online mm-hmm. writing opportunities. And I sent something in. It was called Ladder Writers, and I won £5. Yeah. And I was so chuffed. So it wasn't the £5. So chuffed that I won a thing, and then I carried on and did other online bits and pieces. But I didn't really have a goal. I didn't want to write a novel. Definitely said I wasn't going to write a novel.
You just enjoyed doing what you were doing.
Yeah. But I liked writing shorter form things. And the novella that I wrote came about because of a challenge in a writing group. Not the first writing group, but another one that mm-hmm. Oliver and I set up as a sort of writer's drop-in. And it was the beginning of a year. It was the first meeting of a year, and we were sitting in this pub, and a member of the group said, out of the blue, he said, "Who's going to write a novella this year?" And I saw my hand going up, because I like a challenge. I always like a challenge. And so, having said I was going to do it, I thought I better do it. So it was as simple as that, really. And I wrote The Plankton Collector, again, starting from a short piece I'd written. And I gave myself... So to give myself a target, because I need to write to a deadline, really, to do things best, I looked for a competition, found a novella competition, so completed the novella by, I don't know, the middle of the year, sent it in, got nowhere. Mm-hmm. Then I thought, what am I going to do now? I looked around, very few opportunities for novellas. Mm-hmm. More in America, but not the sort of thing that I write, more sort of fantasy. Mm-hmm. So I did the thing of putting it away. Thought that was a waste of time. Put it away. And then the following year, I discovered just before the deadline that there was a competition in Wales, New Welsh Writing. It's called the AmeriCymru Prize for the novella. Mm-hmm. So I got it out and I sent it off. And I said to Oliver, I won't stand any chance, because this is open to the whole of America as well as the UK. Mm-hmm. And I genuinely thought I stood no chance. And then I got a message that I was longlisted. I was staggered and really thrilled. And then I got a message that I was shortlisted. And when I got that, I cried.
Yeah.
I cried because it's like, well, I can write. Somebody who I don't know thinks I can write. Anyway, we went off on holiday, and the prize giving was going to be at the Hay Festival, not part of the festival, but on the Hay Festival site.
Yeah.
So New Welsh Review, who were running this competition, had hired a space, and it was a given date and time to go along, and the prizes would be announced. Now, the shortlist was only 3.
Wow.
So I actually knew, unless something intervened, that I was going to get a prize.
Yeah.
Which was very exciting.
Incredible, yeah.
Yeah. So come the day, we set off for Hay, and a friend came along too. And the friend said to me in the car, I don't want to worry you, but have you thought about your speech? I said, don't be ridiculous. I'm not going to have to make a speech because I'm not going to win.
Yeah.
I knew I wasn't going to win because they hadn't told me.
Yeah,
This is the way
right.
my mind worked. They told me I was longlisted. They told me I was shortlisted before the announcements.
Yeah.
So they would have told me I'd won, I said. Anyway, without, to cut long story short, I won. And that was embarrassing because I hadn't prepared a speech. And I had to give a speech. I was like one of these Oscar winners. I was laughing and crying and thanking everybody I could think of. And it was great.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a great story.
It was very affirming. So I won publication of that story, and I won money, won £1,000 actually. But the best thing was neither of those. Well, it's great to be published. The best thing was it made me think, right, now I've got to write something else. Now I can write something else.
It gave you that validation that you thought you needed. That's fantastic. So that kind of inspired you. So when you sat down to do the next thing, whatever that became, whether it was the most recent book or whatever, did you feel differently when you sat down in the chair to start the next thing?
Well, I felt a strong motivation. Yes, and what I did with the money that I won was I spent a lot of it on a writing course at T Nawydd, which is the National Welsh Writing Centre.
Mm-hmm.
And on this course, I heard about the possibility of applying for a bursary or mentorship with Literature Wales. So I said to the tutors, do you think I stand a chance of getting it? I didn't want the bursary. I didn't need the money. I wanted a mentor because that was what I thought would really help me move on. So I said to Francesca Rudder, who was one of the tutors, published Welsh author, do you think I stand a chance of getting this? She said, you're never going to stand a better chance. You've just got this prize.
Yeah.
So I applied and I got a mentor. So I had a mentor for a year. And what I'd started writing before that, what I worked on during that course, was a collection of short stories. So I applied specifically to work on this short story collection, which is themed. And that's what I did. And I worked with a very helpful, very supportive writer called Catherine Merriman, who happens to live nearby. So I didn't have to travel far.
Brilliant.
She lives just outside Abergavenny. So I produced this book currently called The Garden of Earthly Delights, because it is all inspired by the paintings and drawings of Hieronymus Bosch. You know Hieronymus Bosch?
Yeah.
So it's not currently published. It's out looking for a publisher. What happened actually was I got a publisher, and COVID banged that on the head because the publisher decided they couldn't carry on with the same model. So it was another independent publisher, and they decided they couldn't afford to carry on with traditional publishing. So we drew a line under that contract. Just
but But that's still out there looking for a home now then, or
So
back
now
out there.
it's out looking for a home. So I've got it out in a couple of places, and I've got another possibility coming up. I feel it will find a home, but the trouble with short story collections is publishers generally are a bit wary of them because they don't sell terribly well.
Mm-hmm.
So they really want you to have a novel. And the same is true of an agent. An agent would only take it on if I had a novel as well. That's just reality. And at the moment, I don't have a novel, though I do have a couple of plans. So I think it might have to wait until I've got that, or it might, I might be lucky. But I'm not worried.
Yeah, you're enjoying it anyway. So
I've written a book. Yeah.
Yeah. So as regards you mentioned the dreaded other N-word novel.
Yes. Yeah.
So how do you feel about that and writing something that's,
yes,
longer and and that's a bit a bigger project, if you like, from that point of view?
Well, I think I have to. I think I've got to bite the bullet. So there are two things. One is something I understand you've done, which is NaNoWriMo.
Yeah.
I did that. So people who don't know, it's the National Novel Writing Month.
Yeah.
Which happens every year in November. And I did that the year before last. And I wrote 50,000 words of a novel. I wrote 50,000 words of disconnected scenes. But I did do it.
Yeah.
I did do it, and I still want to work on that because I'm, I think it's a novel. It's set. I'll tell you what, it is set in Kathmandu in the aftermath of an earthquake, and there's an English mother and daughter who've gone out there, and the earthquake happens, and they get separated, and there is a local father and son, and sort of magical realism elements in it too. It went off in strange directions. But it needs, I have not done the work on it. I worked on the first chapter. And I did send it to a first chapter competition, and it got, I don't know, shortlisted or something. But I've got to work on the whole thing. So that's a project in waiting. But I have another one, which is actually more important to me, which is based on my family. I had an aunt, my mother's sister, who was in the circus. Her name was Phyllis Allen, and she was in Bertram Mills Circus and Billy Smart Circus, and she had a dog act, poodle act, and she was famous. She was in a film with Joan Crawford.
Wow.
I only discovered that after she died. But my other aunt, my mother's other sister, said to me 2 or 3 years ago, "You've got to write Phyllis's story." And it's true, nobody else is going to write Phyllis's story. But the trouble is, I don't know, she didn't write anything down.
So you've got to make it up.
I've got to make it up, yeah. So I've got lots of photographs, and none of them are annotated. And I've got very little detail of where she went when. So I started writing her story as a diary. I met somebody who suggested that might be a way into it. But it won't, I discovered that might be a way into it, but it won't sustain it through the length of a novel. It's too difficult to keep that up. So I think it's going to be made up of different ways of, a bit of diary, a bit of straight narration, who knows what. But that I do have to write it. I feel I owe it to Phyllis, actually. I did know her.
Yeah.
As a child, I knew her, and as an adult. But she was always on the move. So we weren't in the same place together for any length of time.
That sounds like a great project.
Well, I think it's a unique story.
Yeah.
So many stories are not unique. You have to find your own way around familiar material. But Phyllis is, and people I've mentioned it to say, yes, it's a great story. It's a great idea. But at the moment, it hasn't gone much further.
So do you think, if you take that for an example, let's say that you're going to sit down and work on that tomorrow.
Yeah.
How would you approach it? Would you actually try and plan it to some extent? Would you try and plot it out, or would you just kind of go for it? So you mentioned you'd kind of written a few bits and pieces in diary form or whatever. Would you just off you go and start writing? How would you approach it?
Well, I wrote a bit more than bits and pieces. I wrote about, I think I might have written about 10,000 words in diary form. But I need to do more research about the circus.
Uh-huh.
And I've got some contacts, even some people who knew Phyllis still alive. And because she didn't die that long ago, 15 years or so, I do need to plan it out. I mean, with a short story, I can wing it. I can start off and not know where I'm going. But I think with a longer piece, I have to have some idea, even though it'll change.
Yeah.
I have to do that. So my plan is to get the research, to do the research, and then to find an opportunity to actually spend a concentrated period of time writing. And I have applied for a residency. Of course, those kind of things are all up in the air now.
Yeah.
With COVID.
Yeah.
But I may or may not get that, and if I do, it may not. I've applied for it next year, but it might not be. So I see this project as, it's not a short-term thing, but it's if you like, my most important one.
Yeah.
So although I probably will write another novella as well, and I might do that in the meantime. Well, I have started one. I will have to do a novel.
It's there, it's looming.
Yeah, not because it's not about publication even. It's certainly not about fame and glory or money or anything, but it's a particular thing with the book about Phyllis.
Yeah, you've got a desire to tell that story.
Yes. And as I say, I think I kind of owe it to her. And
you'd like to tell that story, obviously, yeah. So what would you say has been the most helpful piece of creative or inspirational advice that you've been given along the way?
So years ago, what my English tutor told me, it was important to distance myself from my own experience. Mm-hmm. So not to write directly, but to take that experience and feed it into another story. That was very important. Otherwise, the most important advice is to be true to yourself and not try and write, never to try and write the way you think somebody else did or somebody else might want you to write, to trust yourself as a writer.
Yeah, and go for it.
Trust your instinct, yeah. Which doesn't mean you haven't got to do lots of work, of course you do, but you're the only person who can tell your story. Mm-hmm. That sounds kind of obvious, but when you think about it, it's also very important. I am the only person who can tell my story. You are the only person who can tell your story.
Absolutely. And if you were starting out again tomorrow as a new writer, or if you could go back and tell your younger self something, what would it be, do you think?
Don't waste time. Generally in life, don't waste time. But certainly in writing, do not fiddle about and get on with it. Because we don't know how long we have. But you only discover that when you're older, really. When you're young, you think you're immortal.
Yeah.
Do not waste time. Do not put it off till tomorrow.
Absolutely. Great advice. So kind of as we wrap things up, so you've kind of given us a bit of a sense of what's up next, but also where can people find out more about you and obviously In the Sweep of the Bay as well?
Okay, so In the Sweep of the Bay is published by Louise Walters Books. And on her website, you can find all the details. It's published on the 23rd of November. You can buy the book directly from her, which I would really encourage people to do as an independent publisher. Mm-hmm. I'd like to say it would be available in all good bookshops, but of course, don't know that.
Hopefully in good time.
But hopefully it will be available in some bookshops. You can find out more about me from my website, which is cathbarton.com. I'm pretty visible on Google.
And I will find you and I'll put all those kind of things in the show notes as well so people can find them. Are you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter. Yeah. At Cath Barton 1.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put all of that stuff in the show notes. But, well, it's been really interesting talking to you, Cath, and I do hope that you get at least one of those novels finished. Hopefully you get to tell the story of Phyllis as well, which would be great.
Thank you.
I
hope so.
Yeah, and good luck with the latest book, In the Sweep of the Bay. It sounds great.
Thanks, Wayne. It's great talking to you.
Joined up writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Cath Barton, whose book In the Sweep of the Bay is out right now. So pop over to Louise Walters Books to grab yourself a copy. And I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That pretty much wraps it up for this week, other than my song, which I will play after I've done this little sign-off. But don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. And then you can have the podcast downloaded automatically every time. Also, remember to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever, because it really does help others to find the show. Or, just tell a friend, I don't know, an enemy, or even a stranger about it. That would be really helpful. So here's the home-recorded demo I mentioned at the top of the show. If you were expecting deep lyrics, you might have to look somewhere else. But hopefully you can tap your foot to it and think about my gran who wrote the first verse for me. So anyway, it's called Colleen, so enjoy. Are you still there? Okay. Thanks for listening anyway. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.